Welcome to Read Local NH, a podcast devoted to celebrating New Hampshire authors. I'm your host, Laura Canoy. Well, today we have two guests whose books revolve around Granite State stories of immigration. One is a novel about a French-Canadian family titled Courtship in Purgatory by Robert Perreault. Robert has written many articles and nonfiction books about the Franco-American experience here in New Hampshire. For more than a quarter century, he has conducted sessions in conversational French at his alma mater, St. Anselm College. And Robert, bienvenue, a big welcome.
Merci beaucoup. C'est un plaisir d'être ici.
Our other guest is Anna Hebra Flaster. She's written a memoir about her Cuban family that came to New Hampshire in the 1960s. It's called Property of the Revolution. Anna's essays and commentary have appeared in publications such as the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Property of the Revolution has won early recognition in international writing contests. And Anna, I don't speak Spanish, so I'll just say welcome to Read Local NH.
Muchísimas gracias.
So Anna, what is the basic storyline of Property of the Revolution?
The book takes readers from our family's lives in Havana as just after the revolution. We were pro-Castro revolutionaries, and then it takes them through our difficult journey as refugees in New Hampshire, which is incredibly where we landed in 1967.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to ask you about why New Hampshire and not other places, but I think you do such a good job, Anna, of juxtaposing your own, refugee coming to New Hampshire story, what that was like, with your parents' story. So it's almost a dual timeline.
Exactly.
Your parents are early adherents of the revolution, they think it's long overdue, and then they're very quickly disillusioned. So it's almost like a dual timeline history.
Exactly. I mean, it was challenging because I was weaving two storylines, mine as a 5-year-old leaving, and then the viejos, the elders, the people in the family who made this extreme sacrifice to give up their Cuban lives, everything they had, the little that they owned, for us to live in freedom and have a shot at prosperity. So that's where the history comes in, which is something I really loved about Romance in Purgatory. There's history woven in, you don't even really notice it, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I didn't know any of that before.
Right, and I have to confess, I know something about the Cuban Revolution, but I did not know as much as I should. And after reading your book, you give such a clear portrayal of what it was like to be there.
Thank you. That was the role of storytelling in our family. The viejos told their stories. It kept Cuba alive for us, and it brought history to life.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to capture that in at least half of the book.
So the title, what's the significance of Property of the Revolution?
So the book begins with the day that my parents get their exit visas delivered by a guard on a motorcycle. They'd been waiting for 3 years. He ends up kicking us out of the house and sealing the door shut with a banner. As a 5-year-old, I was on the street, and I feel like that happened to me yesterday. And I remember the sound of him slapping this sign and across the front door, sealing it shut. And I asked questions all my life about that night, and learned years later that it read Property of the Revolution. So kids, as a mom, don't know necessarily, don't have the vocabulary to express that an injustice has taken place, but I think it really stuck with me that was unjust, that was our home, and the revolution took it. So I think that's almost the seed for the book. It also conveys what the revolution did. It took over everything. It took over private property, whether it was American, Cuban, whether you were wealthy, whether you were working class like us. And then the other part of the meaning is that the revolution has claimed a part of me. I think it claims a part of everyone who lost their Cuban world. So it's partly to convey that too.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. You lost your Cuban world. And Robert, very different situation with your book, but the same question. What's the story at the heart of Courtship in Purgatory? And again, great title.
Thank you. it begins with a story that takes you back to 1949. A woman living with her parents. She's 33 years old, and they control everything, and she wants out. And she figures the way to get out is to get married, because in those days, if you were single and a woman, you had to become a nun to get out, or get married. That was the only way. And so they control everything in her life. She's like their cook. She's their maid. She's everything to them. They're their chauffeur and whatnot. And so, and the other thing is they control who, like if she's going to get married, then she has to marry somebody that fits the bill. And the father is a Franco-American journalist, and he's also president of a Franco-American society, a cultural society in the town. The town is called Sagamore Falls, New Hampshire. Don't look for it on a map because it's not there, but it's a lot like Manchester, it's a lot like Berlin, it's a lot like Nashua, and other towns that have Franco-American populations. And so she doesn't like these guys. The father just keeps introducing her to people that, the guy has to be fluent in French.
Yeah, there are lots of requirements.
And it's got to be good French, very good
Yes.
French. He's got to be a Roman Catholic who goes to church and whatnot. But what's most important as well is the fact that they are upper middle class. And, she wants just a regular guy and have a regular house and do her life in a regular sort of way. And so she will read in years later, because it actually starts in the year of the bicentennial, 1976, where she is reading her dead father's diary, and she sees something in there that she doesn't like. So it takes her back to that whole time when she suffered in purgatory.
And again, the title. Give us a little more on that, because it's a great title.
Well, she's going to meet the man of her dreams. And of course, he's nothing like what the parents want. And so they meet him. They have to test him. Like he can't take her out without meeting the parents. And they grill him like the third degree. And when it's all over, they don't agree at all. This guy is not for us. He's working class. He's in the newspaper business, though, but he's a linotype machinist. So he's not an editor like the father. So and his French is so-so, so he doesn't fit the bill. And so she keeps going out with him a little bit, and they put a stop to it. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but the father comes up with this devious plot to break them up. And so for a while they're broken up, and then they'll start dating secretly. And so that's a sin of disobedience in the eyes. That would be a sin of disobedience. She's sneaking around with this guy. She's not paying, she's not obeying her parents. So in the Catholic faith, when you die, if you've committed sins, and in this case it's a sin of disobedience, you have to burn those, not in hell, because that's permanent, but you got to go to purgatory to, kind of clean yourself up.
I see.
And then you get promoted to heaven. So that's where, because they put her through purgatory, basically. It's a courtship in purgatory.
Well, there's so much to talk about with these books, but I would like both of you to share a paragraph from your book that's either a favorite or you just feel like it will perfectly express just what your book is all about. Give your audience a good feel for it. So Robert, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, her name is Victoria, the protagonist, and she has a friend who's going to help her out. And her name is Rose.
Who's slightly
who's
lower
a
class
little bit,
friend.
and she's a lower class friend, and they don't approve of her either.
Right.
Although she works for the society where the father is president, but he doesn't approve of her or whatnot. And so, and she's a little bit older than Victoria. Victoria's 33. This woman's 40, and she's still single, And so she gives Victoria some advice here. So it's take it from me, take it from the voice of experience. You're a woman and the baby of the family. In many families, if you're the youngest daughter or the only one, you're expected to stick around. Your brothers and sisters fall in love, get married, have kids, while you stay home to cook and clean and play taxi driver for mama and papa. If you have a job, they expect you to hand over part of your wages. They get so used to having you around that if any guy so much as winks at you, even though they pretend to be happy for you, they're having a nervous breakdown. What if they lose their live-in maid? Because that's all you are to them, a maid, an old maid.
Wow. Yeah, that's Rose, and she's a great character from the book. She tells it like it is.
Oh, yeah.
And she's funny, too.
She's very
She's
funny.
laugh out loud
Yeah.
funny.
Comic relief, yeah.
How about you, Anna? Read a paragraph from your book.
yeah, this is-
kind of encapsulates it.
This is the scene where I come home and the guard's motorcycle is up on the sidewalk. I don't know what's going on. There's a huge crowd in front of the house, and they're saying things like, se van, they're leaving, but who was leaving? They pushed me along, and I bumped into the familiar belts and elbows of my waist-high world until I was on the sidewalk next to the enormous moto at the curb. Through our open door, I saw a guardia, the guard. He wore an olive green uniform and was sitting at our kitchen table, his back to me. I stared at the gun holstered on his belt as I brushed past him. My father sat across from the guardia, his hands jammed under his chin, his gaze pinned to the top of the table. The look on my father's face told me everything and nothing at the same time. It was someone else's face, someone else's father. Papi's frozen expression terrified me. I was too scared to talk, let alone ask questions, and no one seemed to notice me anyway. I couldn't have understood then the horrible truth Papi was telling me without uttering a word. Sometimes when our dreams come true, they break our hearts at the same time.
So the dream come true was getting those exit papers, but it broke your heart because they took absolutely everything you owned. And again, you were not wealthy.
No, we were working class, and they took what they took when you are working class, and it's different from Robert's main character's home life. You don't have anything to take, but you're taking the most important thing, which is your family, especially for a Cuban person. The value that we place on family is somehow different than in the United States. We physically have to be close to our family. Separating, leaving your viejos behind is something my parents never got over. And they never saw them again. That's what happens with refugees. You leave with nothing, generally. You don't want to leave, but you have to. You leave with nothing. We had one suitcase for the 5 of us with a change of clothes for each person, nothing of value. But the big loss was the families, the 4 generations of both sides of my family that lived around us. And that was what was the dream that was coming true but breaking their hearts. They knew they'd never see them again.
And like you said earlier, they took the revolution, took your Cuban world.
Yes.
It's the lost
Yes.
Cuban world. And I'm glad you mentioned family because even though there are so many differences in these books, there's so many similarities. And that's what I loved about reading them back to back. So the centrality of family, huge theme in both of these books. And Anna, I like the way you describe it as scaffolding. I thought that was great. So what was your Cuban family scaffolding like in terms of the many layers that it provided you?
Yeah, well, we, unlike in Robert's book where it's a mother, father, and daughter in the household, we had a typical Cuban and Latino household with my mother, my father, my grandmother, my mother's mother. Next door, on the other side of the duplex, was her sister, my aunt, Tia, and her husband, Tio, and their children, and our children. Everybody was all together.
And an assortment of pets.
And pets and canaries, and everybody was together all the time. So that is very different from the American families around us, and the Americanitos loved it. They were always there, trying to figure out what was happening in that house. But it was the 3 women in the family, Abuela, Mami, and Tia, very strong, that formed the backbone of our new lives as Cuban Americans. But it was the togetherness of the family that helped us decode this new world, remember our past, laugh about the good things, the funny things that had happened. They didn't really dwell on the negatives that much, but they kept it alive like that. And from that treasure of culture, I think we felt rich, even though we had nothing. And so I really credit them with providing that scaffolding, which you need when you start with nothing.
Sure, so rich and so supportive, and yet when you became a teenager, which this happens in all kinds of families, all of a sudden this wonderful embrace of family was, get off of me.
Yeah, that's the other side of that. I mean, I don't want to portray that this was, perfect, a Cuban Brady Bunch by any stretch of the imagination, because, well, you talked about dating and what Victoria goes through. When I was 16 and I wanted to go on car dates, my parents wanted Abuela, my grandmother, to go on car dates with me in the back seat. And I was like, that's just not going to work here. What boy is going to go out with me with my grandmother in the back seat? There were no sleepovers. That was strange. Why do Americans send their children to sleep at other people's houses? The need for privacy was a weird thing. What are you up to that you need and that's a very important thing in American culture, privacy, independence. Independence was, and I talk about this in the book, if you were straying from the family middle, the center of the family too much, they would say, tú eres muy independiente. You're very independent. But that's what what is valuable here.
Yeah, I can see the culture clash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. And poor Victoria, she's not just a teenager, which, most teenagers have their teenage rebellion, and Anna had hers. Victoria's 33, and she's just about had it. So how does she feel about the scaffolding that's underneath her? And it isn't just her family, it's this massive community. That's what's so interesting about your two books, is Anna's family was pretty much it in Nashua. Your family, in the book, is part of this huge, well-connected Franco-Canadian community.
Exactly, because in your case, your family, they were new immigrants. Victoria is the daughter of immigrants, but they've been around since the 1840s, okay? About 900,000 Quebecois from 1840 to 1930 came down into New England and other parts of the United States. So there are several generations. They have an entire community, okay, with newspapers in French. They have churches. They have schools. They have clubs and societies. They have businesses and all that. So everybody's watching. So you have to look good in front of other people, because what are they going to think if you do this or do that? And so there's even a class structure. Okay, so you have the working class people working in mills and shoe shops and places like Berlin, where they're in the paper mills and that sort of thing. But you also have business people. They own their own businesses. They're in the professions. They're lawyers. They're doctors. They're other whatever. So all these people are watching Victoria, because her father is a prominent member of the community. In fact, he was even asked at one point in the novel, he's even asked to run for mayor. And he says, I'm not going to get my hands dirty with politics and that sort of thing. So, she's right out there.
So Victoria, we can feel sorry for her. She's got her parents, enjoying the fact that she's a live-in chauffeur and maid, but also she's got this whole massive community with eyes on her all the time.
And don't forget, she's had an education with nuns, and there are priests as well, so they're watching. So that's the religion part of it, And
she's surrounded.
She's living in purgatory for her sin.
Right. Well, speaking of the scaffolding, that's a similarity, very different forms of scaffolding, but a similarity. Another thing that's similar between these two books that I loved is you both include the accents and the sometimes mixed up language of the people in your books. And you know, you do it really well. You're not making fun of anyone, but you put me, the reader, in the scene, and you say, look, this is how people sounded. This is how families sounded. This is how my relatives sounded. So Anna, to you first as a writer, like, how did you make that choice about when to use that and when to set it aside? Because you can't do that the whole book, because it just becomes, you know,
it's
silly.
too much, and you can't exaggerate too much either. I had to tweak that. I would try it on different readers. Is that too much? Is it not enough? But it gives the character, it conveys the character, conveys the foreignness of the character, and the humor that happens with the second language, which was very important. Humor was central in our family, and I don't think, if you're a lucky immigrant, a lucky refugee, you have humor in your household, and we had plenty of it. So I wanted to capture that, and in the audio book, that was one of the reasons I decided that we shouldn't have an actor, a voice actor, because I really thought, and it turned out I could, mimic that accent, because how often do you make fun of have you made fun of your family members when they speak? And I was able to do it.
Your father is especially funny because he could care less if he says it right.
Oh, yeah.
He just wants to communicate.
Yep.
But I thought you did that really well. And was that a tough balance for you to sort of, you know, I don't want to make fun of him, but I also want to show you it was funny.
It was funny, and I think I talk about this in the book, that which you just brought up. He was so comfortable in in his skin, in this new skin. He didn't care.
Yep.
He had no shyness about, no debilitating shyness about saying things the way he thought they were. And there's something about when you're with someone who's that comfortable, you feel comfortable. And I think that was part of the charm that people found in him. He was unique, he was his own thing, he was who he was, and so they felt comfortable too. He had a lot of friends, which is an amazing part of our story too. I mean, here we were, unlike in Victoria's community, we were the only ones. And yet, because he was so comfortable, because he was comfortable, he sort of led the way too in our own pride of we are who we are. And I think through language and through those accents, you can convey that.
Yeah, well, he's a wonderful character in the book, and your mother too, and people will have to read it, but I got so many beautiful moments from those portrayals of your mother and father.
Yeah,
so
yeah, no,
lovely.
and you know, I just realized that something I wanted to bring up with Poppy and Mommy and where we landed in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, we couldn't have picked a better place, because even as different as we were, and even though they were in their circle was all factory workers, many of them French Canadian, and they completely, for the most part, I mean, we had our problems, as you know in the book, but they befriended us. They took us to the White Mountains. They showed us what a marshmallow was, how to roast hot dogs. How to sand your driveway, how to you know, the importance of chapstick. That community, I don't know if we would have found it in Miami, because that was an overwhelming presence of Cubans, and my parents very wisely said, if we're leaving, we're leaving, we're not going back to Cuba. And they loved the motto, the New Hampshire motto, live free or die, right? And they loved that the Canadian border was right there. And could go, because in 1967, it was a cultural revolution here. They thought communism would come here. And they had a saying, keep the Studebaker's tank half full. Because they thought, oh, we can get into Canada if we have to, which is something that happens when you've lost everything. You're never quite the same.
You're never quite settled. You're always looking over your shoulder and making your escape plan.
I call that the long reach of refugeedom. And I think that the book really explores that.
Right. Well, in your book, Robert, there's scenes where people are speaking French badly, and there's that mix of Franglish, I guess you would call it. And unfortunately, Victoria's boyfriend doesn't speak High French, if I could call it that. So how did you sort of, as a writer, highlight that, the troubles that people had when they were speaking that kind of rough French, but also like sometimes it's funny because this poor boyfriend, he's speaking French poorly, and you can just see the parents going, oh, mon Dieu.
Well, in my case, it was because I lived it. I observed it. And once again, the contrast. Your family were new immigrants. My family had been in the States for a long time. So you've had a chance to have differences within the group. People who could speak perfect English, but they were losing their French. So, and yet you had those who hung on to their language. You know, in Quebec, there was this notion called la survivance, the survival, which meant the survival of religion, Catholic religion, and the French language. And people would say, qui perd sa langue perd sa foi. He who loses his language loses his faith. And they didn't want to lose their faith, so they didn't want to lose their language. But to people who were more assimilated, like Lucien, that's the boyfriend's name, his family's more assimilated. They came from Connecticut, actually, where in a smaller town where there were fewer Franco-Americans, one Catholic parish, so everybody was all mixed in.
And they have a Protestant in their family.
And they have a Protestant in their
brother-in-law.
family. Yeah, nobody in Victoria's family would be able to marry a Protestant and without being disowned or whatever. And so I observed the way different people spoke, you know, different French and whatnot, and who threw in, you know, the mixture, the franglais, and who kept the language and whatnot. And so I just, from observation, and I read other Franco-American books and novels as well, to find out, you know, how do they handle it. Jack Kerouac, for example, when he writes in English, but when he talks about his people, he'll write it phonetically. And his French, he's writing it really phonetically, I mean, a lot more than me, and then gives big, long translations. I said I didn't want to get into that. I preferred giving either very simple, like merci beaucoup and, you know, bonjour, and words that are international, people know. And if it gets in a little deeper, then I said, I'm going to give some context to it so that people will understand. And I have actually had critics who've said, I don't understand. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but pay attention.
Yeah, I had the same
there.
problem. I had the same problem because I felt like, you know, I don't want to be translating in parentheses or italics.
Exactly.
And it takes you out. But, and so I tried context, but I had the same experience where people said, I wish that you know, you had translated more often. And it's true. I mean, it is there. It takes a little bit of work.
I thought you both did a very good job. For example, what's the word for guard again?
Guardia.
Guardia.
You don't need that.
But in the book, you say something like the guardia was sitting at the table. You know, the heavy guard grinned at my father. So you say
I try,
reference.
and I think you did the same thing.
I did. I tried to use cognates, a lot of cognates,
Exactly.
so people would understand. And the other thing is, I put myself out. How would I say this? Before I started writing this, I read Portnoy's Complaint. I had read it back way back in college, Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth, where he uses Yiddish. And I said, let's see, because I want to see what it's like for me to, you know, and I noticed that at first I don't quite understand, but the more he used certain words, the more I got it. You know, I says, aha. So, you know, if they don't know the word, try to use it, you know, give it context and keep repeating it, and eventually they'll get it.
Right.
So,
and in my own novel, I had Yiddish and Alsatian and
French.
So so I see the struggle, and I think you both did a terrific job. And speaking of all the history, Robert, just to let you know viewers and listeners know, you've got, I don't know, half a dozen nonfiction books that you've written about the Franco-American experience here in New Hampshire. So your book is really heavily backed up by not just your own experience, but by all that research. Here's a question that I'd love to ask both of you about, and maybe Robert, to you first this time. What do outsiders, non-Franco-Americans, what do they not get about New Hampshire Franco-Americans? What sort of assumptions do you hope to sort of break open with
well, first of all, a lot of them don't even know we exist. That's one of the things.
Really?
Yes, there are places where I will go and I'll say something in French, and they'll look at me like, "Oh, I didn't know you're so American. How do you know?" Well, because we've been here for so long that we don't have accents. And I said, when I go to Quebec, I speak the way they speak as well. So it's like I can pass for both in both countries. In France, that doesn't work because that would be like us going to England and trying to put on an English accent. It just they know right away.
Yeah.
But here in New England, I think there's this perception of everybody works in the mills, everybody's in shoe factories, everybody's working class. There's unfortunately the dumb Canuck thing, which, you know, you're all stupid or whatever, and they don't realize that there are people. I mean, my grandfather, for example, had a college education up in Canada. That he said he did not want to work on a farm. He wanted to get an education and, you know, become a writer, and he became a writer.
I'm so glad you said that because, you know, I know a fair bit about Franco-Americans, but even I didn't realize just the level of wealth and status and prestige. And Victoria's parents, you know, they only listen to classical music and, you know, they go on fancy vacations and so forth. So I'm glad you said that. How about you, Anna? Same question. What do non-Cuban Americans just not get? And how do you hope your book helps them understand?
I think it has to do with the revolution and the cause of the revolution. And I think that anyone who reads the book will have a better understanding that I think there's a widely misunderstood fact that, or myth, that the Cuban Revolution happened because of class, because people wanted more equality. What it came from was the desire to oust the Batista dictatorship and return to the democratic constitution that they had had since 1940 with peaceful transfers of power. Really a model of liberal democracy, and they wanted that back. The rebels promised that. That never happened. I also think there's this view of Cuban Americans as just the wealthy people who lost everything and they have a chip on their shoulder, and so that's why they criticize the regime so much. All of the people I know, all of the Cubans I know are working class like us. My father was a forklift driver. My mother was a teacher in a small barrio school that my aunt started. And yes, there were, of course, wealthy Cubans who lost everything. But if the revolution was supposed to be a classist revolution, then the working class people should have had some gains, and instead they lost what little they had and ended up with a worse dictatorship. Those are some basic facts that anyone who really understands the Cuban story and even what's going on today in Cuba needs to know. This working class Cuban American experience, you need to know that if you're trying to understand the revolution. Because Americans don't get that.
No, and there was a lot I didn't quite get. And one of the most striking parts about your book is you go to college, Smith, I think.
Yep.
And you have a professor who's lecturing you about the revolution, who says, learn your own history. And you're like,
we lived it. What happened to the power of first person, of primary sources?
Right.
Why are you not listening to me as a primary source? Our family's experiences as a primary source. But at the time in the 80s, and unfortunately even today, Cuba for leftist and some liberals is still seen as this model of what could be a communist utopia, and it is totally not that. And we've been trying to tell our story for a long time, and I've been shut down a number of times and schooled by Americans who think they know the story. So hopefully, if they have that point of view, I humbly respect it, but please consider a primary source's views. There are plenty of us who are cheering and hoping for a free Cuba soon.
I have to say that I'm one of those outsiders, and I learned so much from this book. And I had been to Cuba
Oh, you
You know,
have?
I
Oh.
had, yes, in 2000.
As a Canadian, or you're an American citizen.
I'm an American citizen, but if you go through school,
Montreal.
we went, no, we went legally.
Yeah.
This was with St. Anselm College. They had a course on communism, and they wanted the students to spend spring break somewhere. Well, Russia was actually Russia was no longer communist, but anyway, Cuba was the closest place. 2017.
Oh, that's
Fidel had just died in the fall. We were
16.
there in the spring, so Raúl had taken over.
Yeah.
But you know, they bring us everywhere. I didn't feel I was in a communist country, put it that. Except for going through customs, it just seemed like I was in another country.
When you live,
because they take you where
they want
you to go, and we had a really great time.
Yeah.
But I learned so much from this book. It's incredible.
I'm so glad,
Yeah.
especially with your background.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
me too, Anna and Robert. I learned so much.
Yeah.
And we could talk for another 20 minutes, but I'm going to wrap it up with my favorite question that I ask at the end of every single Read Local NH interview, and that is, what New Hampshire authors you both enjoy reading. It can be anything, an author from 100 years ago, it can be contemporary, it can be a children's author. How about you, Anna? What New Hampshire authors do you like to read?
The two that come to mind, and I don't know the authors' names, but I can give you the titles. One is from 2009 called Not Without Peril, and it's the stories.
Oh, Nicholas Howe.
Okay, it's the
Yes.
stories of survival on Mount Washington and the history of tourism and the draw. Really amazing book. And the other one is, I think, from the 40s, and it's called Look to the Mountain. And it's a story of a couple right around the time of the Revolutionary War. I think they're in Manchester, and they end up in New Hampshire. I mean, in the woods of New Hampshire, and you really get to see what that kind of life was like. It was beautiful. It's a beautiful story, and you felt like you were time traveling.
Oh, that's great.
Really great.
It's interesting that you mentioned Nicholas Howe and Not Without Peril, because our last episode of Read Local NH, we had Ty Gagne on, who's an outdoors writer, and Nicholas Howe's books were also influential to him. So it's the second time he's come up in just a matter of months. How about you, Robert? Who do you like to read?
Well, I read a lot of Franco-American authors, and so I have to say my friend Ernest Hebert.
Of course, yes.
And in fact, I was after him for a long time. I said, you're Franco-American, but you have to write about Franco-Americans someday. And so after many years, I finally got him to write Never Back Down, which is his Franco-American novel. But I love his stuff. He writes what he calls hick lit. He writes about people who live in the woods and people you'll never meet unless you.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, it is. And
what was his whole series, Robert? I read that whole
Darby,
series.
the Darby
I read that
series.
whole series.
And of course, being from
You
Manchester.
mentioned that in the book, I think.
Yes, yeah, because he helped me with this book. Chapter 1 is Ernie Hebert's suggestion. He says you need that, that information in chapter 1. So I wrote that chapter just because of him. Grace Metalius, whose real name, her birth name was Grace de Repentigny. Marie Grace de Repentigny was her baptismal name. She was Franco-American, and a lot of people don't know that. Everybody reads Peyton Place, and nobody reads No Adam and Eden, which was her Franco-American novel, which has French dialogue in it and whatnot.
Did she write Peyton Place?
Yeah, she wrote Peyton Place.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. And she grew up in Manchester, not Gilmanton. She was living in Gilmanton at the time. And so, yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned Peyton Place because, everybody thinks Peyton Place, they think about, it was a smutty book in the 1950s. I have read that book so many times. It is such a good book.
Oh, I haven't read
The writing is unbelievable.
Well written, and it's not smutty. Maybe for the 1950s.
Right.
Victoria's parents would not have approved, and Victoria probably would not have approved either. So, and I have to mention too, in nonfiction, Howard Mansfield is one of my favorite writers. Someone told me when he had not yet published his book In the Memory House, but it's someone who had worked on the book with him, an advisor, and she said, Bob, you have to read this book when it comes out. And I went to France with some students, and I took the book with me and I read it in France, and that was my home away from home in the Memory House. So
Well, he's a great writer too.
Yeah.
I had him on the Exchange when I was on HBR many, many times, and I think I'm going to be interviewing him for his new book this fall. So I will tell him that he was well spoken of today.
Okay.
We have to wrap it up there. Robert Perreault, I really want to thank you for being here.
it's Perreault.
Perreault.
Robert Perreault.
Perreault.
Yes.
Robert's new novel is called Courtship and Purgatory, and Anna Hebra Flaster. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
It was
as
great
well.
to be here. Thank you.
That's Anna Hebra Flaster. Her new memoir is called Property of the Revolution. Thanks, as always, to Concord Community Television for making Read Local NH possible. Check out Concord TV at yourconcordtv.org and their YouTube channel, Concord NH TV. One more time, that's yourconcordtv.org or their YouTube channel, Concord NH TV. Our theme music is by the Sound Effect Kings. Thanks, everybody, for being with us on Read Local NH.